All right, Unit 2 naming. We have 3 main types of naming that we discussed. Ionic, molecular, and acids. To figure out what something is, if it's ionic, it has a metal and a nonmetal, which ends up being a plus and a minus. The only positively charged ion that's not a metal is hydrogen. So if I have a hydrogen and a nonmetal, then this is not an ionic compound. But if I have any metal, positively charged thing, and a nonmetal together, it's an ionic compound. For molecular, it's 2 nonmetals, which means I'm either going to have a negative and a no charge, like carbon or silicon, something in that 4th column, or I'm going to have 2 negatively charged ions. For an acid, I have to have an H plus and then an anion. So, an example of an ionic compound would be something like sodium sulfide. Sodium is a metal. It's in the 1st column, so it has a +1 charge, which means it has 1 hand. Sulfide is a nonmetal. It's in 2 columns over, so it has a -2 charge, which means it has 2 hands. Sulfide comes from sulfur. When a nonmetal becomes an anion, it changes its name. It ends in "ide." So chlorine turns to chloride. Bromine turns to bromide. Sulfur turns to sulfide. So I have to add another Na to make sure the hands are equal, and I get a formula of Na2S. So sodium sulfide is the same thing as Na2S. If you look at something that is molecular, I don't do hands anymore. I look at prefixes. Mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, deca. That tells me how many things I have. So if I have something like SO3, S generally would have a charge of -2, same with O. So I've got 2 negatively charged things. It can't possibly be an ionic compound. So I have 1 S, so I would say something like monosulfur trioxide. And the prefixes, mono and tri, go before the names of the elements, and the last one ends in "ide." But I never start this off with mono. So my name for SO3 will be sulfur trioxide. If I had something like NO, this is one of my favorite examples because it tells you exactly when to put things in there. I have 1 N, so mononitrogen, but I wouldn't say mono first, so just nitrogen. And then I have 1 oxygen, so instead of saying monoxide, I have to say monoxide, so I'm not saying monoxide, which is a perfect example of why there's no mono out here, but there is one here. Last but not least, if I look at acids, there's a couple quick rules. 8 goes to ic, ite goes to us, and no O, hydro. The key to acids is I have to use hands. It's similar to ionic, except it has a few special rules. So if I had something like sulfuric acid, I know because it's an acid I have an H+. Sulfuric comes from sulfate. Sulfate on my cheat sheet is SO4 2-, which would have 2 hands. H has 1 hand, so I have to add another H, and I end up with H2SO4. An acid that's not a polyatomic ion, an acid with no O, starts with hydro. So say I had HCl, no O, so it's hydro chloric acid.
She agreed to